Hello and welcome to episode 29 of The Climate Skeptic. I'm your host, Laurie Wastel, an associate editor at the Daily Skeptic. Now, like it or not, for many years, the United States of America has been the global hegemon. That means that the rest of the world is often subjected to its cultural and political fashions. Not least, net zero. But how does that work? And what happens when an administration like Donald Trump's tries to radically change the ideology that we're all downstream of? Well, to discuss that, I'm very pleased to be joined once again by Dr. Tilak Doshi, who is the Daily Skeptic's energy editor. Welcome, Tilak.
Thank you, Laurie. Great to be back.
Yes, very good to have you here. So, we've got a lot to get into today, but let's start with this actual piece you did recently. It began on the EU's censorship efforts under its draconian Digital Services Act. It's actually been enforced for a few years now, but there's all this talk of pre-bunking from Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission. And of course, that is now interacting with this much more free speech-minded US administration under Donald Trump. And there's a lot of tensions going on there. But to begin with, I suppose, tell us a bit about how the DSA works and what the EU is trying to do with it.
Well, they define DSA as attempting to shut down illegal or hateful activities on the internet. Now, of course, the question about who defines what is illegal and what's hateful is left unanswered. And I imagine by their definitions, it is the government, or in particular the European Commission, that takes upon itself the sole right to determine what is harmful and illegal. So the article that I wrote on the Digital Services Act started off with this amazing, bizarre article written by Michael Mann and Bob Ward, two very well-known actors in the NGO space on climate change, where they made the very bizarre accusation that Stalin would have approved what Trump did, which was he and his administration proceeded to dismantle a number of agencies, including the National Center on Atmospheric Research. And they came out extremely upset in their favorite newspaper, The Guardian, saying that this was least Sankoism in practice. Of course, the interesting part of all this was that this was a marvelous attempt at projection. These were two people who have spent the last decade or longer trying to smear and cancel skeptics in the climate change arena, and now they're accusing President Trump and his administration of doing precisely that.
Well, I mean, just to come into like that, there's a great line in your piece, which is that they, in this op-ed, they're claiming that this move to shut this institute down must have been paid for by fossil fuel interests, but really all they're doing is taking away government funding to an institution that had been, subject to this slush money before. I mean, it's exactly as you say, that it's projection, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. When one takes away government funding for a particular institution, that does not mean it's censorship. It means that the government has decided that funding this organization or this group was not in its interest. Now, governments are elected precisely for that reason, for carrying out their promises and their commitments, which they outline in their campaigning for office. Now, if anyone tracked what the NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, actually churned out over the last decade or so, it was a standard, themes about climate alarm and how life is going to end as we know it unless we follow the kind of policies that many of these NGOs and their left-wing billionaire funders wanted governments to pursue. So with the Digital Services Act, it's come to a head. The EC, the European Commission, put a $140 million penalty on Elon Musk for the lack of transparency on his X platform. The interesting twist to that is that soon after that fine was imposed, and there's no resolution, by the way. He hasn't paid it and he hasn't made an appeal. But what he did follow up with was a complete publication of his algorithms so that the entire world can see just what algorithms run the X platform. So now, if the EU or the European Commission were to point to certain transgressions by X, then they will have to prove to the global community just what it was within Elon Musk's platform that has been non-transparent or illegal in any form. So we're going to see an interesting situation develop. As you know, it's already come to a head with the U.S. State Department banning 6 individuals from coming to the U.S.
Well, just before we get into that, though, Tilak, and we absolutely will, I would like to go over this this extraordinary concept. I have been reporting on the Digital Services Act and the sort of ideas behind it for quite a long time. Back in 2023, I did a piece on it, and I had to look through. It was I think it's the European Digital Monitoring Observatory, this sort of EU-linked think tank, which had this word. Sort of, you had to go and find it, but they were using this word pre-bunking, and I said this was sort of suggestive of the types of things that would be done under the DSA. And now, 3 years later, this is not just a sort of one activist NGO linked to the EU saying it, but it's Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president herself, talking about the importance of so-called pre-bunking. And it's this, well, as you rightly point out, it's a deeply Orwellian term, but I suppose tell us a bit about what it means and what they're trying to do there.
Yes, it's really quite hair-raising. I mean, the very term pre-bunking means that they can identify transgressions before they occur, and on behalf of the citizens that they claim that they're representing, they're going to help us avoid wrong think before it even happens. It really, really is quite frightening. And it's quite amazing the parallels you see between this whole debate about climate change and net zero with a few years ago during the COVID epidemic, where we were supposed to listen to only one source of news on COVID, and that was the government sources. Jacinda Ardern, then the Prime Minister of New Zealand, put it best when she said openly that the only true source of COVID news would be her government and no one else. So at one stroke, they removed all potential contributions to debate and questioning by saying that, hey, this is wrong think, we're going to pre-bunk it. Now, Ursula made the comparison of misinformation as she called misinformation as a form of virus, and the Digital Services Act would serve as a vaccination. The parallels are eerie.
Well, let me just, I've got the quote here. I mean, it's just extraordinary language. So on pre-bunking, prevention is preferable to cure. Perhaps this is from Ursula von der Leyen, perhaps if you think of information manipulation as a virus, instead of treating an infection once it has taken hold, that is debunking, it's much better to vaccinate so that the body is inoculated. I mean, it's just this kind of medical authoritarian language sort of transferred over from COVID to information in this sense. I mean, it's deeply chilling.
Yes, absolutely. And, it makes us wonder what would have happened if Trump, in fact, did not get in for his second term. We would have been barreling down this path with the Democrats, which have increasingly shown themselves to be unhinged and further to the left. So we would have had a situation where both the US and the EU determining for the global population just what exactly was misinformation and how it would be controlled. Now, it so happens that not only did Trump get in for his second term, but he's wasted absolutely no time in filling critical positions in his administration with people who were themselves actually smeared and cancelled. Dr. J. Bhattacharya, who was smeared by authorities and NGOs, including the EU, as promoting misinformation. He was one of the dirty dozen misinformers on COVID. And now we've got J. Bhattacharya and RFK Jr. playing the lead roles in the health establishment in the US. So we couldn't have got a greater occasion to see the conflict between two sides of this extremely important battle.
Absolutely. And it is fascinating, isn't it? I alluded to this at the beginning, but of course the censorship industrial complex, as it's called, has been growing up in many ways with the blessing of certainly the Biden administration and more broadly the American establishment for quite a long time. And now, of course, Donald Trump and his administration are trying to completely turn the page on that and say that this is totally not what they want to be doing. And as such, they've been making these extraordinary moves, frankly, to, in this case, visa ban certain high-profile censorship champions. And these include Imran Ahmed, who is the CEO of the Center for Countering Digital Hate, who I've written about on the Daily Skeptic, who has really lobbied the British government massively to up the already draconian provisions of the Online Safety Act. And from the EU's perspective, it's the former EU commissioner, but it's Thierry Breton, and he was their sort of information commissioner or something like that. But he described himself always as the EU's digital enforcer. And famously, of course, before Elon Musk was due to speak to Donald Trump on X in the run-up, of course, to the American election, he issued this extraordinary sort of writ, this imperious and censorious demand that there not be too much sort of untoward conversation in that, and that they had considered the safety of it. And these two Americans having a conversation about the American election, having their, being sort of chided by this high and mighty European official, and in fact, in that case, he soon after had to resign. And he was too censorious even for the EU, and they had really, he had embarrassed them there. But so anyway, these two sort of key figures of censorship cheerleading globally, now having they're being prevented from going to America in this, perhaps it's a symbolic gesture, but this is a really a massive sea change in the global standing of this debate.
Absolutely, and we're seeing it coming full circle when we've just heard Merz, the Chancellor for Germany, finally admitting that net zero has not been good for Germany. We've had the Visegrad countries saying that they would not be party to some of the very extreme green policies that they were trying to impose on all of Europe. And now when you see, Chancellor Merz himself admitting that shutting down nuclear power was a wrong thing to do, that Germany was in fact stagnating and deindustrializing. We see the EU and some of its leading characters themselves faced with reality and unable to carry on believing in their own virtue signaling policies that they've supported for so long. And again, I believe that is the sheer presence of President Trump in global forums like the UN and at Davos, pushing their nose, into this mess that the EU itself created and its allied institutions and organizations within the United Nations kind of zoo, so to speak. And so I am quite optimistic that in this hubris that the EU has engaged in for so long, and trying to bring in their censorship into an territorial direction to cover speech by anyone in the world, and in particular in America, one of the few constitutions